Hello, and thank you everybody for joining us for this session on migrating smarter, not harder, how to avoid bringing your tech debt to the cloud. We have a lot of great insights from two Azure experts for you today, but before we start, I have just a few housekeeping items to cover. So first, we're going to aim to run about 60 minutes today. This webinar is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording and the slides that we're using after the event to review. And lastly, attendees are all in listen-only mode, but you can enter questions into the Q&A function as we go. I encourage you to do so. We are saving some time at the end to get to as many as possible. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Alan Pittner, who is an enterprise architect at Dataprise. We also have with us Randy Dover, who is our Azure engineering manager at Dataprise. These two together have nearly 50 years of experience in IT and a ton of experience designing, implementing, and supporting all different kinds of Azure environments. Lastly, my name is Stephanie Hamrick. I am a senior marketing manager at Dataprise, and I will be your moderator for today. Next, I'll tell you very quickly about Dataprise for those of you who don't know us, and then we're going to get right into it. So Dataprise is a national managed services provider. We have been providing services end-to-end for our clients across the United States since 1995. We believe technology should enable you to be the best at what you do, so we deliver best-in-class managed help desk, cybersecurity, network, infrastructure, collaboration, and user solutions, basically everything to help you get there. We're also a Microsoft Cloud Solutions partner with advanced specialization specifically in Azure, and we have a lot of experience in this space helping to architect and optimize our customers' cloud environments. So now let me share a little bit about what is in store. We have three sections for you today. First, we're going to start off detailing the correct way to get to the cloud, including best practices and guardrails. Then we'll talk about really breaking that tech debt cycle and ensuring that before you move to the cloud, you know what it's actually going to cost and how to identify hidden costs. And then we are going to finish up with some thoughts on how to identify if the cloud is an especially good fit for you right now. So with that, we will move right into our first section, which is how to get started in the cloud the correct way. And our first topic in that section is landing zones. So Alan, I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you want to talk about the importance of having a solid foundation?
Sure. Thanks, Stefan. Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. So first and foremost, how do you reduce tech debt with landing zones? That's probably one of your questions right now. Well, I tend to think of landing zones as kind of how you build a house. So if you're looking to either expand your operations into the cloud or just kicking the tires of trying to move away from what you currently have, it always comes down to if I'm going to reduce some tech debt or try to take advantage of what the cloud offers, how best to move there is by understanding what your requirements are, your needs, and then seeing how those requirements and needs translate into Azure. Landing zones are kind of your first step, understanding your operational outcomes you want to achieve, and also your business outcomes, but also understanding that there's always a cost to the technical side. So how best can we plan for the cost while also maintaining operational performance, resiliency, and also allowing you to expand into new technologies as your requirements dictate. Next slide, Stephanie. Perfect. Thank you. So landing zones and cloud adoption framework. There's four pillars here for the landing zones. There's actually probably eight, but just because of the size of them, we probably couldn't put all eight on here. So identity, networking, governance, and security. And a landing zone is a pre-configured environment for those guardrails, and they're also tailored to your organization's needs. But how do you get from a landing zone that's tailored to your needs from day one? And that's where the cloud adoption framework comes into. What that is a set of standard practices, tools, guidance to help organizations define your cloud strategy, plan the adoption, and then also manage those services effectively. That covers all phases of cloud operations, some strategy, planning, ready, adopt, govern, and manage, ensuring that the alignment between business and technical goals are achieved. The adoption framework is also designed for IT administrators, but also business decision makers to achieve short-term and long-term objectives of competence And they're also updated continuously as the cloud evolves. The operations and methods to achieve those outcomes are updated in real time. So how does the CAF reduce technical debt? There's kind of ways we go about helping customers identify what their workloads are, assign priorities, and then identify the best ways to get them into the cloud. The first is through an assessment and prioritization. What we'll do is assess your existing IT portfolios, identify legacy systems, any applications that are modern but also outdated as well, and then infrastructure contributing to the technical debt. We'll also categorize those workloads by complexity and business value, and then allowing teams to prioritize high debt, high impact areas for modernization or migration. There's 5 R's as far as how the migration can kind of go in the cloud option framework. One is rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, and replace. And those address different areas of technical debt, either by the workload type or adopting new services completely to replace the legacy systems. Uh, for example, the things we see the most of those are refactoring. That's where customers modernize applications to cloud native architectures to reduce maintenance costs. Rehosting or like lift and shift, or we move systems to the cloud, enabling quick wins while planning for future optimization. A lot of our customers take this as a first step to move their workloads into the cloud to get away from having to buy new hardware or just have a co-location facility. And last is also replacing by moving from apps that are hosted on-prem to more of a SaaS-based solution that can actually remove a lot of the debt automatically from there. The tools that the CAD uses are what we like to do is use the Azure Migrating Appliance. That's a tool that we can deploy to your on-prem environment to look and see what servers applications are running. It can also automate discovery and dependency mapping to help us understand what servers are communicating to what servers and services, to help us understand how best to scope out a landing zone, not only for day one use, but also for long-term growth and modernization as you mature those workloads. Um, Back in the good old days that Randy and I started doing this, it was all by hand. So doing an assessment was quite laborious, but now there's a lot of good tools from Microsoft and also third-party providers that allow you to get a pretty clear TCO picture of how much those workloads will cost in Azure or another cloud provider, also the cost, and also give you some options around should I move this to a virtual machine, or there are other like PaaS services that I can adopt with this workload. Also from governance and best practices. Without any kind of governance or best practice how you use cloud like Azure, you're pretty much going to end up right back where you started with technical debt. Some of our customers we've seen deploy Azure on their own, and they come back understanding that they've made some decisions that maybe not are the best for the long term. And so they come to us and understand how best to look at the frameworks, look at their business cases, and how best to re-architect their Azure environment moving forward. Really, governance just comes down to standards around security, compliance, architecture to make sure that once a design has been settled and deployed, any new workloads that are deployed in that cloud environment adhere to those standards, and you're not having to manage disparate networks, identities, all those fun things that can cause people to either lose sleep at night or understand just actually what they're doing with their lives moving forward. So also cost optimization. It also gives us identifying how best to use those budget dollars and where are the most, I guess, easy wins as far as reducing costs. We'll talk about more in the future slides or in the webinar. So what are Azure landing zones? Now we've kind of gone over the cloud option framework. Landing zones are merely pre-configured scalable Azure environments that provide a secure and governed foundation for hosting workloads, application migration, modernization of those workloads, and also innovation, either at a small scale or enterprise scale, depending upon how many servers or workloads you have. Typically, what we see is there's kind of two types of landing zones. One's a platform landing zone. Those are for like shared services like identity services, domain controllers, connectivity, being a firewall, VPN gateway, or a virtual WAN. And then also we have application landing zones. Those are specific workloads. Sometimes we have people who just use prod, dev, test as their application landing zones. Other times we see application landing zones to just for specific applications themselves based off the requirements and also what teams will be managing those workloads. Typically, the Azure landing zones, like I mentioned before, multi-subscription models. That way we segregate production management and non-production environments to make sure that they align with governance and operational requirements and allow your teams, if they are doing any kind of dev tests, a little more freedom to experiment without having to impact production workloads. And ideally, the best outcome for Azure Landing Zone is it's modular and repeatable. That way, if you do need to grow, you can quickly just deploy new subscriptions, new networks, et cetera, based off those standards and not have to worry about reinventing the wheel every time you want to adopt a new service or technology. And then why are they essential? Again, looking at the tech debt, It's understanding how you can be more standardized and secure from day one. That way you can accelerate not only your technical wins, but also your business outcomes to hopefully achieve those ROIs that you're looking for. Allows you to modernize IT operations and improve agility because you understand how your Azure environment's working and the pluses and minuses for adopting new technologies. And quickly going over some talking points about Azure landing zones. As I mentioned before, there's probably 8 core tenants for an Azure landing zone. Those are the Azure billing and Entra tenant, the identity and access management, management group and subscription organization, network topology and connectivity, security, management, governance, and then last but not least, platform automation and DevOps. So just taking a step back from there, those are the 8 core foundations for foundations. So it comes back to understanding exactly how can you utilize those core components to your benefit, both from day one, but also from day 200 to day 1000. Some things great about how we can modularize Azure is by using management group hierarchy. That allows you to organize subscriptions based off the teams going to be working on those services. So, for instance, if you have a connectivity subscription, your network team will probably be in charge of that. So you can assign RBAC role assignments, Azure policies, that management group that's aligned to your connectivity subscription. But also, if you have a production workload, you can also just assign those teams to that management group and policies. That way, you can kind of use different Azure policies tailored to those workloads and have a one-size-fits-all Azure policy moving forward. And also design principles for Azure landing zones. We like to use as many subscriptions as possible. There's never a one size fits all for Azure landing zones, as this landing zone example shows here. This is more of an enterprise type of design. It has a primary Azure region on the left, and on the right has a secondary region. The subscriptions are the little green boxes for primary and the blue and secondary. These are aligned to having a shared services subscription, which would be for your domain controllers, connectivity, VPNs, express routes, etc., and then having a prod, dev test, storage, etc. That way you can deploy applications where they have most benefit and also have the most operational need. From there, we can assign different policies and move forward with the clear understanding of what those subscription workloads are costing us, but also make sure they're compliant and secure moving forward. Next slide, if you don't mind, Stephanie. This is more like a smaller SMB type landing zone. As mentioned before, there's really not one size fits all. This one's just more of a primary region. That way, if you don't really need any disaster recovery or any kind of multi-region application deployments, we can tailor those workloads into one virtual network, one subscription, but still use Azure subnets, NSGs, firewalls to make sure those networks are secure and isolated from each other as well.
Awesome. So hopefully we all agree at this point that landing zones are important for any cloud migration, but if you're not completely convinced, I'm going to hand it over to Randy to talk about what can happen if you skip this step.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So one of the things that can happen when you skip this step is that your resources are not organized in a logical manner. One of the other things that that can happen is if you there's what's called the cloud adoption framework, which Alan referenced, and it is built on a subscription model, and we have seen it to where people try to adopt the subscription methodology but using resource groups instead. And one of the issues with that is there are limitations to how many resources you can put in a resource group. And so if you don't do your planning properly, then you can run into those limits, and then have to be forced to backtrack and try to re-architect, which, depending on how far down the road you've gone, may be next to impossible. So it's really important to get the planning step out there first, and then to deploy the subscriptions and resource groups in a logical manner so that you don't run into those limitations.
So, next, we're going to talk about some of the guardrails that you can put in place once you're in the cloud, hopefully with a properly configured landing zone to keep it on track. So, Randy, I'm going to hand this one back to you. What are some of the common pitfalls we've seen that can cause costs to rise after migration?
And that's a good question. There are some several different factors, but one of the things is with virtual environment such as Hyper-V on-prem, such as VMware on-prem, it is very easy to spin up a virtual machine. The same thing is true in the cloud, whether you're using Azure, AWS, or some of the other cloud technologies. It is very easy to spin up a machine. Therefore, that's what we call a virtual machine sprawl. When you may have some a dev team that they spin up a machine because they're wanting to test something out, and then they don't uh, do away with that machine when they're done testing. And then there are right ways and wrong ways to delete a machine, and if it's done incorrectly, you can have what's called orphaned resources. Very common to have an orphan disk or an orphan NIC. And if they are out there and they're not, even if they are not assigned to a machine, they still produce cost. So getting the governance in plan is ahead of time is very important. Another thing that we have seen is aggressive backup schedules, and that such as 30 days on a daily backup, or 60 days on a backup for dailies, and then potentially uh, like 12 months of backups or 60 months of backups, going far beyond what the organization requirements are. And each one of those backups in Azure is a full backup. So that's something to keep in mind of plan your retention, and can get that ahead of time when when a resource is backed up, whether it's a virtual machine or a MI, a managed instance of a SQL. The retention that is in place at the time of backup will be how long that resource is kept, the backup for that resource is kept. So if it's done in 60 months and then the next day you change it to 12 months, then that resource, that backup will be kept for 60 months. It will be whatever the retention was at the time. So it's very important to get that planned out ahead of time. And then not right sizing resources. One of the things that Alan mentioned is Azure Migrate, and that helps us to plan the size of the machines when it's coming from on-prem into Azure. It gives us some very good guidelines. It looks at the usage of on-prem. It does not. It does look at the current configuration, but it also looks at the usage of that configuration. So let's say you have a 16 core CPU and then 64 gigs of RAM, but it's a file server and you're only using a handful of that, then Azure Migrate will take that into consideration and suggest a size when migrating into Azure, to reduce that size. Also, there are a lot of times where we've seen people um, say, "Well, I want this, this machine not to have any resource contention," and so they build a 16 core, 64 gig RAM they build it in Azure, and then come to find out it doesn't need near those amount of resources, and so you can make sure you're looking at the right sizing that. Azure has some advisors, and one of those will help you to look at the size and see if it can uh, be brought down to save you money. Then this last one is workloads running in expensive regions. There are several regions across the globe. There are, I believe it's 8 at last count, regions in North America, and some of those regions are more expensive than others. Like the West Coast is more expensive than the East Coast. And when you think about it, it's logical. The Utilities are more expensive on the West Coast than they are on the East Coast. Property value more expensive. So all those things are passed on to the customer by Microsoft because they have to be. And so it's you need to plan which region am I in, which, if I live in um, the East Coast, if such I live in Tennessee, I don't want to put my primary workloads out in the West, one, because of the cost, and then also because of network latency. So it's not just the monetary cost, it's the network cost also. So you need to right size the machines, need to pick the primary region and the secondary region that makes sense to you. So
Thanks, Randy. For this one, I'm going to hand it back over to Alan. Let's talk about governance.
Thank you, Stephanie. So governance, that's probably a fun word we all enjoy in our lives sometimes. But the truth of the matter is Azure itself is pretty standard compliant. They say, if you look at all the documentation about it, meets PCI, NIST, etc. Well, that may be true. Just because you deploy a virtual network and a virtual machine in Azure doesn't mean that you're going to be NIST compliant out of the box. So governance in itself is something that obviously for cost operation, security, and also compliance, you'll need to adopt in Azure. Next slide, please, Stephanie. I'll keep going on to here. Let's see for next slide. Perfect. So before we get into the RBAC controls and Azure policy, really what Azure governance does for you is allows you to see exactly how compliant you are, which we'll explain in a second, but also make sure that all your RBAC controls are properly assigned and also your compliance requirements are met. So Randy, do you want to tackle the role-based access controls portion?
sure. So role-based access it ensures that just like on-prem is recommended, you start off with the least privilege, and if the user needs more permissions, more access, then you increase that as needed. The same is true in Azure. You can give permissions at a resource level, such as a virtual machine. A lot of organizations have a network team, so you can give the, the network team access only to the networking area, and then you could have a master administrator or a global administrator that has access over everything. So easier to manage from that aspect. So we always want to make sure that we take those into consideration. We again start off with least privilege. One of those things that least privilege does is it prevents users from spinning up a machine. So you can have there's a role called virtual machine contributor, which will allow a person to create a machine and then do certain functions on that machine. And if they don't have the right privileges, the right roles, then they can't spin up that resource. Um, Also, one of the aspects of RBAC is to limit access to the whole subscription or to a resource group, and you can be uh, as broad as doing it at a subscription level. You can do it as narrowed down, as focused, as granular to give that to a virtual machine, a single virtual machine access. Alan, do you want to talk about policy? You want me to, sir?
I can talk about policy all day if you like, but hopefully we got only a few minutes here. So as I mentioned before, Azure policy is very, very powerful out of the box. So if you are an organization that does have some compliance regulatory like PCI data, NIST, et cetera, you can actually deploy some built-in Azure policy sets and turn that on to audit mode. And that way, once you deploy your resources and you have it operational, you can see exactly how your compliance is with that certain standard. Um, Azure policy also allows you to block non-compliant resources, meaning if you have a policy to where public IPs are not to be associated to a virtual machine directly, Azure policy will deny that deployment moving forward. So that allows you to standardize not only on your security posture, but also make sure that that's adhered to without having to have someone look through each deployment or checking the logs to make sure a virtual machine was deployed correctly. Also, control costs with Azure policy. We can have a policy to where if you have a naming convention, that new standard is applied across all of your resources. That way, if you have a new IT hire that needs to manage an Azure, say your virtual machine or network, from day one, they'll understand the naming convention and understand exactly what that resource role is and who's responsible for it. Also, from tagging can be very powerful for cost management. Understand where your cost centers are, especially if you're doing any kind of bill backs to any vendors or customers based off their consumption. Azure policy can be set to make sure that certain tags are deployed with the resource, and just makes your life a little bit easier to make sure that your standards are met, and also that if you adopt new technologies, your security and compliance will adopt with them. I guess we'll go back to Azure Cost Management, Randy.
Okay. So Azure Cost Management, there are a couple of different areas in Azure where you can go to look. One of them I mentioned earlier, Advisor. There is a section in the Advisor called Cost. It will look at the environment and make recommendations. I mentioned earlier about right sizing machines. One of the aspects of in cost management or cost advisor is that it will do an analysis on the machine. Once it's in Azure, it will do an analysis and see, based on usage over the last 30 days, whether that machine is right sized, or if not, and then it will, if it deems that it's that it has been over provisioned, then it will make a recommendation to decrease it in size. Another thing that you can do is you can set up in cost management. So I mentioned there's two different areas. There's cost advisor and then there's cost management. In cost management, you can set up budgets. You can set up a budget to where it will warn you if you're going over X amount of dollars. You can set a budget to where at a certain time, and this is not really recommended, but that it will stop resources if you go beyond that budget. So it's a hard stop. But I like to do the alerts. That way you have that heads up ahead of time beforehand. So it's a really good cost savings and cost management situation.
So we've been talking mostly about costs, which are one obvious type of tech debt, but I would argue that risk is another type of tech debt that can build up and cause problems for your business. Alan, do you want to talk about mitigating security risks in Azure?
Sure. So zero trust is probably one of those buzzwords that everyone's aware of, and the industry seems to be slowly adopting to more of a zero trust mindset. And when you look at how you would adopt cloud services, the perimeter is no longer just around your, colocation, your virtual networks. It's also wherever the person is in the world that needs access to either a subset of your data or all the data itself. So zero trust identity centric means consolidating all of your identities into your Entra ID resource. And that way we can use a tremendous amount of capabilities to see not only is Alan's login password correct, but is his device compliant? Is he logging in from a known location, or Alan logged in this morning from Tennessee, but now in 2 p.m. Eastern time, he's in North Dakota. Is that actually correct or not? Using those powerful signals, we can actually just start limiting who can access the environment, but also have great visibility into how people are using it. Another great feature about zero trust methodologies is allowing just in-time access to virtual machines or resources. EntreD has a lot of different capabilities to allow you to schedule time for a resource to work on a virtual machine or data set, etc. And that way you're not giving carte blanche access or untimed access to your network. As Randy mentioned before, that's extremely powerful and with RBAC roles as well. Continuous monitoring, as I mentioned before, and adaptive security, it allows you to see how people are working in your environment and always be updating how you kind of, I guess, in a way, just make sure that person's who they say they are with conditional access is either ingesting Intune signals as well, or just maintaining like a passwordless policy as well, moving forward with zero trust. And going back to the well-designed Azure landing zone, without a good, clear design for how you're going to use your environment, zero trust really can't be adopted until you get those basics done. So we always, when we're doing landing zone designs, have a zero trust mentality, no matter if you're going to adopt that from day one or that's on your radar for maybe a year from now as well.
All right, so let's move on to our second section of the day, breaking that tech debt cycle and knowing what your costs are going to be up front. And we're going to start this section with just a quick statistic here. 69% of cloud customers overspent their initially planned cloud budget by more than 25%. This data is direct from Microsoft. They surveyed customers on Azure in 2021 to find this. So it's a really common problem for costs to be more than expected. And part of this, what we've been talking about with governance and keeping costs low, that's one part. And the second part is knowing in advance what your cloud cost will be. So there's the planning stage, and then there's the correct expectations stage, so that you're not, when you move to the cloud, just trading one kind of tech debt for another. So on this subject, how do you go about calculating your actual costs? And for this one, I am going to hand it over to Randy and pass the controls over to him. He is going to walk us through how to use the TCO calculator from Microsoft. So give me one moment here. I'm going to hand the controls over to you, Randy.
All right, so this is the Azure total cost of ownership. You can go to this URL here, and we've got it in the slideshow, and you can do this your own self. And so the way that this is done, you've got servers, and you can add a server workload. I'm just going to do some very simple here. This first one, we're going to do VMware workload. You pick which type of server it is, Windows or Linux. And then you pick whether it's a physical server or virtual machine. We're going to choose a virtual machine for this. We're going to do Windows, the operating system license. You can have data center or standard. I'm just going to choose data center. And for this, I'm just going to choose 10 VMs. And we're going to go with VMware because that's how we defined it up here. This is the cores here is per machine that you're working on. I'm not going to, we can be very granular with this. If you had a virtual machine that had 4 gigs of RAM and 4 cores, 16 gigs of RAM, and then another VMware with 8 core and 32 gigs of RAM, you could define all of that here. For sake of this, I want to say that each one of these machines had 4 core, and each one of them had 16 gigs of RAM. You can, when you're running this, again, this is defining your workload. You can choose to optimize it by CPU or optimize it by memory. Doing that will give different recommendations of the SKU, the family of machines in Azure. Okay, so I'm going to add another workload here, and I'm going to call this Hyper-V, and basically do the same thing here. It's going to be a Windows Linux server. It's going to be virtual machines. Again, we're going to just leave this at Windows and Data Center. And again, I want to up this to 10. It defaults to Hyper-V, and that's what I wanted to use for this example. I want to use the same cores and 16. And I'm going to sort this on memory here. And then I want to add one more, and I want to call this physical. And again, you can be very granular. If we have of these 10 virtual machines, let's say 5 of them had 4 16, and then 5 of them were 8 32s, we would actually divide this up to get us a better cost representation. We could do Hyper-V 1, Hyper-V 2, etc. But for the ease of this, I'm just going to do all 10 of these machines were 4 and 16. And let's say we do have one physical machine. I'm going to leave this at physical. It's a Linux, it's a Windows machine. Leave it at data center. We're just going to use one here, and then here for the number of processors. Let's go up to 8 processors, 1 core per proc. Let's change that to 2, not 21, 2. And then how much RAM did we have? Let's go to 32 gigs of RAM. And again, you can be optimized by CPU. You can be very granular here. Won't use none on the GPU. If you had 2008 or 2008 R2 license, you would want to click this button. I'm going to say that we don't. If you have a database, you can put this in here. The type of database you have. This will calculate whether to move it to a virtual machine or move it to a managed instance. The amount of data you fill in here will make those recommendations. At this time, I'm not going to choose a database. You can do the same thing with storage. If you've got network storage here, if you've got VMware Hyper-V, you're probably going to have network storage. And so we're going to pick the amount of storage that we have, whether it's a SAN, NAS, etc. Leave it at SAN. We can change this to SD. The amount of data we put at 2 terabytes. The amount of backup data. Like I say, we've got 2 terabytes in use, but we're only using 1. I say in use, installed. Only 1 of it is in use. So leave these here. Networking, we're just going to leave this here. Actually, I'm going to change the destination region. Make it East US, and then we'll click. So if you want to add any workloads, you do this up here. Then once you've got all your workloads defined, you click next. On this, Microsoft has done some calculations across the country on your electricity costs. This is the average cost across the United States. Again, whether you're in East Coast, West Coast, Central, that will define these items. So if you know the exact cost of your area, you can put the number in here. Same thing for the storage costs. If you know what you paid for your SAN and for your NAS, you can put those numbers in here, and it will give a very real number. It's going to give a real number, but it's going to give a very accurate, more accurate number. The amount of servers that are managed by your IT, the hourly rate, etc. And again, any other assumptions you can put in here, change them. Anything that's not predefined. I'm just going to leave all the defaults here and click next. And then, so this is a base of 140,000 that Microsoft Azure will save on those workloads that we defined. That was 10 VMware. Now, also, that does not take into consideration those, when I put those in, the Hyper-V, the host cost. I did not put the host in there. So that's and one of the things I wish that they would do here is this number right here. I wish they would start it up about here because you have to pay for those hosts, the SAN and everything. You have to pay for that at an upfront cost. So it's usually around the 100K mark for an environment that I just described. And this line would be a little flatter. However, it's still going to end up here at the end of 5 years. This line, this Microsoft line, is a true starting at 0 because it is a service and you pay for it on a monthly basis. You do not have to pay for anything up front. Now, there are 2 things that I wish that they would include here, they being Microsoft, that they don't. One of those is reserved instances. You can choose to buy reserved instances for a lot of different resources, not just virtual machines. If you have an app service, you can buy a reserved instance for it. If you have Azure Files, you can buy a reserved instance for it. What that means is you're committing to either a 1, 3, or 5 year. You're going to keep that resource, and you will have a steady price over that time frame. it will lower the cost by anywhere from 42 to 73% per resource. Then also one of the things that it does not, this costing does not take into consideration is a hybrid license. So I'm going to give an example of a family size called B2MS. B2MS is, or B4 is roughly $100 a month. If you do the reserve instance, that brings it down again anywhere from 42 to 73% per VM. A B4 is usually around the it's a lower percentage mark, so it's usually around the 45 or so. So that brings that $100 down to $55, and then you can do a hybrid license on top of that, and bring your cost down to even in the high 20s to low 30s. So that $100 machine is now costing you around $30 a month. Those uh, those two items, the reserve instance and the hybrid license, are not in here, and I've made the recommendation, but they haven't done it yet. So down here is just a nice little graph that shows the total cost of on-prem in the form of a pie chart, and then the total cost of the Azure in a pie chart. And you can scroll down in here and get even a better breakdown of what you're paying over the course of these 5 years. And then here is, you got the hardware cost, the software cost, the electricity, which you don't see electricity over here because it's built into the data center. So the Azure Total Cost of Ownership Calculator is a very powerful tool, and if you put in your specific machines, you will get a very close calculation of what it will cost you to be in Azure for 5 years. The default is 5 years. You can change that. So, Stephanie?
Awesome. I'm going to take back control here and we'll get our slides back up. We're going to keep moving along quickly here. So part one, calculate what you're actually going to spend, but then also you want to account for some hidden costs. Alan, what are some costs that businesses can sometimes forget to budget for?
Sure. So high availability is not out of the box available for you in Azure. You have to actually plan and deploy for that. There's kind of two kinds of high availability. One is multi-regional, meaning you have two VMs running the same workload in say East US, West US. But also there's ways to be more cost conscious to kind of hedge your bets on the risk and say deploy virtual machines across different availability zones in the same region. What that really means is you have a virtual machine in one data center in East US and a second VM running the same workload in a separate data center in East US to hedge against one data center in the region having a failure. Also, understanding that if you are going to be replicating data across regions, how to use, say, Azure Front Door, Azure Traffic Manager to assist you in a point in time where if you do, say, have a disaster recovery drill, you have resources available to actually assist you with, one, making sure those workloads are quickly and brought back up successfully, but also reduce the amount of steps you need to take to make sure that your environment's back when running is from your RPOs and RTOs. Availability zones do have a cost, meaning you're sending data across a network to a different data center. So people kind of miss that sometimes. Also, geo-replication for storage data is a great way to hedge your bets on storage loss. But also, if you are having data move across different regions or availability zones, there'll be a cost there as well. And also, tools like Veeam have their own kind of gotchas if you are using Veeam for disaster recovery or a backup in Azure. Also, the regions that you choose, there's really no set standard on what region you can deploy stuff to, meaning you can, without any kind of Azure policies or best practices, you can deploy resources to multiple Azure regions that make really no sense in the technical standpoint. Also, if you do have a virtual machine that's running in a separate region, that's going to be more time and money to actually bring that VM up and also send data back and forth to your main workload systems. Also, one thing that people kind of overlook too is the key vault for secrets management. That can be for your keys, your certificates. If you're going to be encrypting your network or storage or have an application that requires an assert, key vaults can be an extremely powerful and secure way to store those without having put them on a virtual machine or put those secrets in code. They're not really expensive, but sometimes people overlook the cost there as well. as I mentioned before, network costs can really be a burden on you, not only for if you're doing multi-region data replication or virtual machine replication. If you are sending data out across the public internet, that can be extremely expensive. You can use private endpoints to make sure that any kind of egress traffic goes across the private Microsoft backbone. That way, it will reduce some of your costs for you as well. And also make sure that if you're sending logs to any kind of third-party SIM tool, that we reduce the number of logs to only those that have the most value, because as you know, so many systems are quite chatty, and every time you send that data across outside the Azure network, you'll be charged for it. So there's some things that we see customers want to implement, but don't really account for from day one.
Alan, I thought of something else. One of the things that produce costs that a lot of users don't take into consideration is the replication, like a storage account or backup faults. It usually defaults to GRS, and we can talk about what those are later on. But a lot of times they can be lowered to a different cost, and so that it defaults to a more expensive. So.
Mm-hmm. Also, some design patterns. We always try to emphasize one, availability, but also scalability. Sometimes based off the assessment, some of your SQL workloads or applications can be moved to an Azure PaaS service. The benefit there being a lot of those PaaS services have built-in backup and replication, either across visibility zones or different regions. That can be one way to maintain performance, but also having a scale out, meaning if you have, say, a web app and you do have a cyclical need for that app as far as consumption, we can scale up different instances either by doing some logic on the back end or by just redeploying that into a multi-node session. That way, you're only paying for that performance that you need, and then when that kind of consumption storm is over with, we can scale back those number of nodes down to one or two. Also, network segmentation for design patterns, always segment your networks. No more flat networks, and make sure that you at least have network security groups in your subnets to make sure that those are gated and protected. Also use a firewall appliance too if you're doing any kind of looking at the network traffic from east, west, north, south as well. So sometimes people need a firewall, sometimes based off the design patterns, they may not need a firewall. That's it for me,
Awesome.
Stephanie, on that one.
So those are costs associated with your Azure configuration. And Randy, I'm going to hand this one to you to talk about one hidden cost we often see being unaccounted for.
Yeah, training. One, you're still managing Windows or Linux machines, which if you had that on-prem, you already know how to manage it. There are some aspects in Azure that that users don't inherently know until they start working in it. So we do have some training that we can provide, and then also um, if you don't have the staff trained up already, then it's easy for us to come in, easier for us to come in, since we have the expertise to do that set up for you, and then also to train afterwards.
Awesome. So that brings us to our last section here, which is how to answer this question for your business. Is the cloud the right answer for you right now? So first we're going to talk about looking inward. So Randy, I'll hand this to you. If you're an IT leader looking at your environment, what should stand out to you as not a fit for the cloud?
About nothing. We have we've done many migrations over the years. We haven't found anything. If it will run on a Windows machine in your environment or a Linux machine, then it'll run in Azure. We have migrated personally. I've done in the thousands of machines that I've migrated from on-prem, and we haven't had issues with bringing them now with Microsoft having end of life of 2008 machines. Then those older systems can be tricky. But if it's 2012 R2, which is end of life on-prem, we can migrate that into Azure and do an in-place upgrade. But as far as what's not a fit, there's not much. We have again done many different OSs, brought them into the cloud, many different workloads.
Nice. So, continuing on with our theme of looking inward here, Alan, do you want to talk a little bit about how you decide where and what workloads you could start with?
Sure. So a lot of our customers kind of either come to us because they have an aging hardware and they're curious, do they spend, X amount of dollars on refreshing their hardware, or how much would an Azure, spend be for comparable performance or even maybe performance and resiliency? So that could be a nice way to see, does Azure make financial long-term sense? And then also, what would the roadmap be to get to Azure? Workloads no dependencies. If you have just standalone workloads, we can put those in Azure just to test. Get your feet wet in Azure slowly. System modular components or non-critical workloads, dev test is always great as well. Low risk, high reward, meaning allow your dev test resources to have much more availabilities for a number of resources, types of resources for innovation, and see how they can help move the company forward. But also put some guardrails in place to make sure they're not spinning up extremely expensive or complex resources, but still are able to be innovative. Um, if your on-premise struggles with uptime or scalability, if you have, really bad, unreliable power or your UPSs are not really working, that can be a great way to, put your toes in the water with Azure. And then also just flexibility for your workforce planning. We're seeing that is mainly the biggest driver recently is just how to reduce, technical debt around AD, meaning if you have, using AD or SSCM to manage your endpoint devices, how can Entra assist you with Intune to reduce the need to have line of sight to your domain controller but still maintain compliance and security around your endpoints? Remote workers are also becoming more and more prevalent in the last few years. So Azure Virtual Desktop can be a great way to supply people with a secure desktop on your network, but also put guardrails around what data can be moved out of your network versus just having everyone bring their own device and download the company data to their own device. And then also just flexibility and control for your on-premise setup. If you're tired of being chained to hardware, then why not take a chance with Azure?
Awesome. And there are some other pressures here that we can talk about that are external, that might be telling you it's time to migrate. Randy, one big pressure on everyone's mind is the recent VMware acquisition. What kind of pressure is that putting on businesses to consider Azure?
This is a big one. VMware was bought a year and a half, 2 years ago by Broadcom. About 2.5 months ago, Broadcom announced some sweeping changes in a non-good way. The cost per core has gone up significantly, and then the minimum number of cores that you must license have gone up significantly. Then on top of that, there were users or organizations that had purchased perpetual license to try to allay some of that cost per core and minimum core. And so those are not being honored anymore. So you may find if you have VMware, you may find your costs going up significantly, triple and even quadruple. And so it may be a good time to take a look at Azure and bring those costs back down.
Hmm. And there are some other pressures on hardware right now. Alan, would you like to talk more about those?
Yeah, just cost hikes with the tariffs, availability of hardware. Who knows what's going to be 6 months from now from the cost, but also availability. Azure's got a pretty good ability to actually procure hardware. Microsoft's a pretty big buyer, so they'll probably be first in line for the hardware. Uncertainty, as Randy mentioned, the VMware licensing could be a huge issue for customers moving forward. Just the back and forth in Broadcom about number of cores you need at a minimum and the price per core. And I think even there's some legal action being contemplated against Broadcom for VMware licensing right now. So who knows how that's going to play out. And again, like I said mentioned before, just lead times. If you are in a place where you need to replace hardware and you're getting 6 to 8 months from that lead time to actually get your hardware, in that amount of time, we can probably get you in Azure before then, maybe even cheaper too. So just give us a call.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Randy, as well. That brings us to the end of our presentation today. We have a few minutes. I'm going to try and get to some questions here after some quick housekeeping. So, to all of our attendees, if you want to work with our Azure teams with these two experts for your cloud environment, DataPrize for sure can help you migrate your workloads to Azure the correct way so that you don't end up with more tech debt than you started with. We can help you support your Azure environment to keep it up to snuff. Or if you're already in Azure and you feel like you are so off track that you did end up with this new kind of tech debt that you need to be free from, we can optimize your Azure environment to tighten security, reduce costs, and more. So with that, that is the end of our session today, and we will take maybe one or two questions here in these last few minutes. Right before that, though, we have this QR code and the link down here for you. If you are looking for more resources to help support your cloud journey, we had a ton of them, so I just put them all on the same page. So if you go to this link, you can find a few of them that will help you no matter where you are in your cloud journey. If you're just starting, if you're in the middle of it, or again, if you feel like you're off track and you need to get optimized, we have some content in there for you. So thank you to everyone in the audience today, and to those of you especially that submitted questions. We did have some come through, so I'm going to pull this up, and we will use these last few minutes here to get to them. If we don't get to your question, we have the record of all of those, and we will be having people reach out with the answer to those. So first question here is, Randy Allen, do you ever have trouble with the Azure migration tool underestimating resources that are needed, especially in VDI environments?
It is pretty accurate because the Azure Migration Tool looks at the usage of the machines. It does look at the provisioned resource, but it looks at the usage. So it is pretty accurate as far as determining what SKU machine to bring that machine over into Azure.
Okay,
Just add what
awesome.
Randy was saying, also just understanding the workflows from different user groups on VDI and what applications they're consuming can give us more metrics to help us use the Azure Migrate estimates and make sure they're in line with expectations.
Perfect. The second one here is, let me pop through. Do you, either of you, have trouble looking in Azure with the administrative control locations often changing?
Referring to the number of updates Azure gets on a routine basis, sometimes it is less than ideal when you do log into Azure and they've changed an admin portal or how you would go about using the UI to administer whatever resource you're trying to administer. All I can say is just look at the documentation, try to keep abreast of what changes are coming. Usually the Microsoft will say they'll be changing ABC for different type of resource depending upon the release schedule. Sometimes they aren't as good as they should be, but I do see your pain on that one. Randy, do you have similar pain stories about that?
Yeah, they change it frequently. Learn to use the search up at the very top of each blade. There's a search in the main portal. There's search. You can find different resources, and then at each one of the resource blades, there's a search there, so you can use that. So yeah, I've had to use that many times. It's like that used to be here, but it's not anymore. So.
Awesome. And then we might have time for just one or two more here. I'm going to ask you first, how do we strike balance between using all of these government setups to enforce cost control and allowing for our dev teams to still be innovative and have agility?
Good
That's a good
question.
question.
You want to go first, Randy, or shall I?
Doesn't matter. I was going to say it's not mutually exclusive. They
Mhm.
can play together. So you can have the governances in place, such as not spinning up a machine with a public IP, and then that way the devs can still spin up machines and not violate that policy. So,
And use
Alan?
management groups too in your landing zone management groups. That way you can align the dev test description with the management group. That way you still can apply the same policies that you do in production, but you can customize the policies to be a little more lenient based off where the requirements are for dev tests, so we are not handcuffing them with the way you do your production environment.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are right on time here, so I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Again, we do have all of the questions that you asked and that you submitted recorded. And so if we did not get to you during this session, we will for sure reach out with some more information to see if we can get those questions answered. Just a final thank you both to our experts, Randy and Alan, and also to our audience for joining us. We hope that you each learned something new from today's event, and we will hope to see you on the next one.
Thank you all.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.